Welcome into the GoVols247 Podcast. I am Ben McKee, and I am joined on this edition by Ryan Schumpert of Rocky Top Insider, here to talk Tennessee basketball, even though I'm not sure if Tennessee basketball will ever win another game. We still have to come on here and discuss what is going wrong for the Baller Vols. Our mistake or at least my mistake for not recording a podcast after Tennessee beat Houston when the vibes were high, because the vibes have not been high since. Tennessee has since lost to Kansas, and then they lost the game they definitely shouldn't have against Syracuse in the ACC-SEC Challenge on Tuesday night on the road in the Artist formerly known as the Carrier Dome. I don't care that it's now the JMA, whatever initials, Wireless Dome. It's the Carrier Dome to me.
It's real, and this close to your heart, it's real Acrisure Stadium,
Yes.
Heinz Field vibes.
1,000%. That is a perfect example of it. I'm sure it's just the absolute same as Nissan Stadium and what was it, LP Field?
LP Field, Adelphia Coliseum, I believe is what it was when it first opened up.
That was a bit before your and my time, though. I grew up with the LP Field and Heinz Fields rocking. So appreciate you joining me, Ryan. I guess, how are you doing first and foremost?
Yeah, doing well. I mean, you hit the nail on the head with the Houston to Syracuse, just like the however many hours are in a week. The 7 days zoom out, both those games were on a Tuesday. Vibes dramatically different for Tennessee just a week later after that Houston game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll go ahead and apologize in advance if you can hear my kiddos in the background. They are home from daycare a bit early, and Lightning McQueen is on the television, and that brings out quite a bit of joy. So apologies in advance if you hear the minions in the background. But going off of your comment there about the vibes drastically changing within a week, how much do you think Tuesday night's sloppy performance, really from both teams, as it was mentioned quite a bit on the broadcast? Rick Barnes talked about it in his post-game press conference. Just bad basketball on both sides, quite frankly. Hard not to think that both teams playing 3 games in 3 days last week, having to travel all the way from the West Coast in Tennessee's instance, then having to turn around and travel north to upstate New York. Not at all the reason Tennessee lost, not at all trying to make an excuse, but just in terms of the sloppiness and kind of projecting this team ahead and freaking out or being concerned. I think that's one reason maybe there shouldn't be too much of a freak out or too much concern, because I think that was a legitimate reason as to why not only Tennessee struggled, but both teams struggled.
Yeah, I've wondered about that too, and it's just one of those things you don't know how much credence to put into it. I think the aspect of, part of me is like, well, they had 5 days off, they had a good bit of time off in between, but to travel again and to, I think part of it is I'd almost put more credence into it being the first road game of the year against a Syracuse team that's pretty good defensively, has good positional length, has been really good at forcing turnovers even before the Tennessee game, more than anything. And I guess just like a 6,000 feet view of it, what Tennessee typically plays 10 road games in a season. 9 in SEC play. It feels like they typically play 1 out of conference true road games. And I could be off on this. It feels like about 3 of those games every year, and I don't think Tennessee's out of the norm for any college basketball team. You go out and you play really poorly. And to me, I think it's not shocking that Tennessee went out and played poorly. I think it's disappointing that so many of the little details that they handled poorly. If they would have even taken care of those in a game where they played poorly, they still would have won. And that's where I think Rick Barnes talked about it when we got back from Vegas. He said, I told the team that I don't know if last year's team could have beaten Houston, but they wouldn't have lost that Kansas game because they would have had attention to details. And to me, it's hard not to have the same thoughts. And I just point to how both the first half ended and the second half ended. Tennessee's caught watching a rebound or watching a shot at the end of the first half. Really everybody responsible, but a freshman, Amari Evans, probably the most glaring. And Syracuse gets a putback to take the lead. And then last defensive possession, for all intents and purposes, tie game with 15 seconds, or really, I guess it was 33 seconds. There was like 3 seconds between the shot clock and the game clock, but just a simple ball screen. And Tennessee miscommunicates on whether it was going to be a switch or not, and that leads to them having to foul to kind of take away a wide open layup at the basket. So that's the type of stuff that, Tennessee going out and playing bad, I don't think is anything to hit the panic button, but you feel a lot better when your team's able to do the little stuff well and some of the little things well in crunch time to pull out a win when you're a better team than your opponent. Then, obviously that just didn't happen on Tuesday night.
I'll be honest with you. I wanted more from Felix Okpara on that last Syracuse possession at the end of the first half. I thought he gave up that initial offensive rebound, and certainly Amari Evans, I think, kind of got caught ball watching. But when you're Felix Okpara and you're a senior and a greater wingspan and more height than Amari, and that's more your responsibility than his. It was just not a good game for Felix and Cade Phillips, and we will certainly touch on that. And I thought that was one of the glaring examples of how Felix and Cade struggled in that one, just their inability to really do anything in that basketball game. But I think you have to start with Nate Ament and Jacoby Gillespie and their struggles for the second consecutive game before you look at anything else, because Tennessee's going to go as those guys go. I mean, you have a couple of go-to players. I know that was a topic of conversation on social media that Tennessee is lacking go-to players. I don't think they're lacking go-to players. I think they have go-to players. Jalen Carey has established himself as a go-to guy down on the block, I think. JP Estrella, if he can stay healthy and get back on the floor and stay on the floor, I think he's a guy that you can give the basketball to and really go from there. But then Nate Ament and Jacoby Gillespie, they're go-to guys as well, and they just have not played well the last two games. And like I said a moment ago, I just kind of think Tennessee is going to go as far as those two guys take them. And it was another poor performance on Tuesday night for both of those newcomers. Why do you think they are struggling? Obviously, both guys kind of dealing with different things. I have my thoughts, but I want your thoughts as to why you feel like those guys are struggling and your level of concern going forward, because things are not going to get easier these next two basketball games.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it's very much different degrees. Like, I would point to Jacoby against Kansas. I thought he in large part struggled because he had played a ton of minutes for 3 straight games, and to me, it felt like he lost his legs. And that's the thing I would say. I don't think Jacoby even played that bad against Syracuse. 7 assists, 2 turnovers, was able to get to the basket and score some, but doesn't hit a 3-point. Just to your point, Tennessee needs him to play like a star. He didn't play like a star. He played like a solid player. The shooting was strange in that game from him, I thought. Like, I don't know if, I made a kind of a joke and note to self, Tennessee would Jacoby Gillespie obviously had to play a lot better, but it's like, note to self, Tennessee makes it to the Final Four in a football stadium. I don't know if I like Jacoby's shooting because, he only took 3 shots. I thought he was a little tentative at time. He airballed 2 of those threes, and I don't think was very close on his other miss. So with Jacoby, I guess it's just a different vibe I have, where I'd say maybe there's not a concern level that he's going to be like bad for Tennessee or terrible, because I don't think for the most part he's been that, or just a nothing. Like, he doesn't give Tennessee anything. I think there is a little bit of a level of concern of, can he be a number one on a team that competes to win the SEC and a team that makes a deep run in the NCAA tournament. Nate, to me, is a different situation. I mean, I thought Nate was way, way worse in this game with how badly he turned it over. I think you have a more, just naturally, you think he's going to grow more. He's a true freshman. He's clearly a talented guy. He's going through all this for the first time. So in that sense, I don't think there's a ton of panic, but I would have hoped that he'd be a little bit further along at this point. And I think the thing that does give me concern is that he just has not shot the ball very well at the basket. Even when he's gotten to the basket, he has just not been very good at finishing. I would point to the play against Houston where, not to say that Nate's afraid of contact or anything like that, but there was a play where he was kind of afraid of contact. He drives baseline, he tries to shoot a layup, and Chris Sinek makes a great athletic play and blocks it. Like, I could see why Nate thought he could have made it, but he just goes in there and tries to dunk it. There's really no world where Chris Sinek can block that shot without fouling him. So his athleticism has been maybe a tad underwhelming at the basket, and that's what I would say is, as far as what I'm watching, what I want to see from Nate Ament, I want to see him be more efficient and more effective finishing when he does get to the rim. Because I think he's going to be able, with his length, whether that's in transition or just when Tennessee's able to reverse the ball and open up some driving lanes, he's going to be able to do that. But Tennessee needs him to finish better when he does get there.
Yeah, I thought he would be further along as well. And that's not to say that he has been bad, because I don't think he's been bad. He's been bad the last 2 games, but overall this season, I think he's off to a nice start. I mean, he has won SEC Freshman of the Week in 3 of the first 4 weeks possible. His numbers are still good. He's been productive. It's just, I think you hit the nail on the head. It just hasn't been super efficient. And what surprised me the most is the shooting, because even though I wasn't around for a lot of summer practice and preseason practice leading up to the season, when I was at practice, he did not miss. I mean, and it's a silky smooth shot. It's one of the things that scouts rave about, and one of the many reasons he's projected to go so high in the draft is because of his shooting ability. And we haven't, outside of, I guess it was the Houston game, really haven't seen him demonstrate that. And so that's been my biggest surprise with Nate. I thought he would shoot the basketball better up until this point, but I'm not concerned with Nate going forward. I think he's going to be perfectly fine in the long run. I kind of chalk up the last 2 games to he's learning and he's adjusting to college basketball, because the other thing that he is struggling with, that you talked about as well, is just the physicality.
Yeah.
But we already knew that, and so that hasn't been a surprise to me, just because he does have a slender frame, and he's needed to add weight, and he has added weight. I mean, going into the season, it was like 19, 20 pounds he had already added. So he has added strength, but there's still a ways for him to go there. And I think what you described in that Houston game is a perfect example of him still trying to adjust to the physicality of the game. Rick talked after the Syracuse game that he's not going to be able to do the things that he did in high school, and I think that's exactly what he's talking about when Rick says that. But ultimately, I think Jacoby and Nate will be fine. I would be surprised if they don't meet expectations. And part of this is expectations are so high for both of them, especially Nate, that it's almost impossible to meet them because they are so high. But I would be surprised if they don't pan out in the way that a lot of people thought they would going into the season. I just think they're really going through an adjustment period, with Jacoby learning to be more of a true point guard than a combo guard, learning to play point guard for Rick Barnes. Nate adjusting to the physicality of college basketball, also learning to be a perimeter player for really the first time in his entire life, because in high school he was asked to be more of a 4. Now he never plays as the 4, and he is also trying to learn how to play for Rick Barnes as well, and this system. So I just think there's a lot of learning going on. And the comparison I made on the Swain event Thursday morning was the one to Kennedy Chandler, where Kennedy came in with high expectations, got off to a bit of a slow start, and then about midway through the season, or a third of the way into SEC play, it just finally clicked for him. And I think that's what we're going to see with Nate and Jacoby, is at some point in January. We saw it with Chaz Lanier last year as well, kind of towards the end of January, beginning of February. There was just a moment where it kind of clicked. And for Chaz, it was that Oklahoma game last year where he stopped thinking and he went and played basketball, and the rest was history. I think we'll see that with both of those guys at some point.
Yeah, I think the Chaz and Kennedy one's interesting. I think those happened pretty similar. I mean, Kennedy was ACC SEC challenge. You know, he got benched at Texas when Tennessee made that comeback, and it felt like he was a different player after that. And then that Oklahoma game, I believe, was Pizza Series weekend last year. So what, the first weekend of February, or maybe the second weekend, depending on how the calendar fell. So yeah, I could see that. One more note on each guy, I guess. One with Nate. I think the good thing about it, and why I don't think he'll be as bad as he was in that Syracuse game, because look, even Houston, he was battling foul trouble. Kansas, he was great in the first half. He just struggled in the second half. To me, Syracuse, and this will probably be the case for most of these things we talk about, it was a different level of bad against Syracuse than it had been any of the other struggles. Is the turnovers is what made it so bad. And Nate, I think, his floor is so high because he is going to get fouled a lot, and he's a good free throw shooter, and because he can rebound the ball well, and do other things to help the team. So that's where I even though Syracuse was so bad for him, I think even while he's working to get to where you're talking about, where everything's clicking and he looks like a all SEC or maybe on some nights an all American guy, I think he can still help this team at maybe a higher clip than what it looked like when it was bad for Chasselnier or when it looked like when it was bad for Kennedy Chandler. And then the thing with Jacoby that I think ties into some of his production. And you mentioned it. Like I think Tennessee ideally would like to be able to play him off the ball some, and Ethan Berg has just been really bad these last two of these last three games. He was okay against Kansas, really bad against Houston, and really bad against Syracuse. And Nate could probably do some of it too, handling the ball, but Berg's probably the guy you point to of like, all right, he's clearly the backup point guard on this team, and if he doesn't play better, Tennessee's not going to have the luxury of playing Jacoby off the ball for 8-10 minutes in a game where they can try to play to his strengths as a shooter and get him in more actions where he can score without having to create off the dribble, which it feels like is what's having to happen for him a lot right now.
You might have led me in to your answer for my next question, but aside from Nate and Jacoby's struggles, that's always going to be the headline. Every single game, for the most part, is Nate and Jacoby were awesome, or Nate and Jacoby struggled. And not that Tennessee can't overcome, because they nearly did in both the Kansas and Syracuse games, but it obviously makes life a whole lot harder. So, like we saw with Zakai Ziegler, their success is going to run parallel with the team's success. But aside from that, because we both believe that both will be fine long term, but certainly needed to discuss their recent struggles, what was your biggest concern, or what is your biggest concern from the last two games? Is it Ethan Berg and that two guard rotation, or are you going elsewhere?
I think the thing that I would say, and this goes back to the Houston game too, I think my less of a concern to me, it's more of just a reality. I don't think this team is great defending the ball defensively, which they've been fantastic the last 5 years. So I just think that's an adjustment. I think the Syracuse game is a great example. Tennessee's defense was good. The offense was the issue in that game. But to the point I made earlier about defensive breakdowns, Tennessee's past couple teams could have played horrible on offense in that game and probably would have won because they would have been better on defense. And I don't think there's just less margin for error on this offense that I do think is good because the defense isn't great. So to me, the question with that becomes, how does Rick Barnes adjust how he plays? Is Rick Barnes more willing to play Jalen Carey and maybe JP Estrella more minutes and give up more on the defensive end, because those guys aren't as good defensively as Cade Phillips and Felix Okpara is, to lean into trying to be a high level offensive team, because both those guys are good passers too when you throw the ball inside of them. I mean, Rick talked about that after the game. Jalen should have gotten the ball more. He'll make the right play. It's not like you throw the ball into him, he's just going to shoot it every time. So to me, that's just a general question of how does that evolve over the course of the season. To me, they're finding separation at two guard. I like what Bishop Boswell is giving them. I like what Amari Abrams is giving them. To me, that's one thing I've said in the offseason. I thought athleticism was going to be a question mark for him, and why I do think he's got the right mindset defensively, but he's just not going to be an elite defender because he's not an elite athlete, which pointed to me of he's made the right stuff. If he can go out there and hit some open shots, he can help this team, and that's exactly what he's done. He's shot the ball pretty well from the perimeter. He's played solid defense. Not that he's great, but he doesn't have a ton of breakdowns. So I like what those two guys have, and I think it creates a more interesting dynamic because Bird can do a little bit more on the court if he plays well. But just as a whole, I'm not overly concerned about that.
There's still more to discuss about Tennessee basketball in the wake of their losses to Kansas and Syracuse, and we will do so on the other side of this quick timeout here on the GoVols247 Podcast. Welcome back into the GoVols247 Podcast. I am Ben McKee, and I'm joined by Ryan Schumpert of Rocky Top Insider, who is kind enough to join us to recap the last two losses for Tennessee basketball before they get back on the road again on Friday and travel to Nashville to face Illinois inside Bridgestone Arena on Saturday night. Before we preview that Illinois matchup, there are still a couple of Tennessee basketball topics to discuss from the last loss to Syracuse. And before we do that, I need to encourage you to go like, rate, or review wherever you find your GoVols247 podcast. Right before Shump and I pressed record on this podcast, GoVols247's Patrick Brown and Ryan Callahan finished recording a football podcast recapping National Signing Day, which was a massive success for Josh Heupel and the Tennessee football team. So make sure you check that out wherever you find your GoVols247 podcast. And while you're checking that out and listening to the latest drama surrounding Legend Bay, if you wouldn't mind liking and reviewing our podcast, because that helps us in a big way, we would greatly appreciate that. Ryan, what were your thoughts on the front court minutes coming out of the loss to Syracuse? Because I think, as you kind of touched on there at the end of the first segment, I mean, it may be time to shift some things around. And I said this during the offseason because I'm a big fan of the front court. It's going to probably be by committee, and it might be a different guy's night each night out. So that may very well still be the case, because first couple of games in, I was not very high on Jalen Carey. Now I am very high on Jalen Carey because he's picked it up and really turned the corner these last couple of games. And I think he needs to be a focal point going forward. And I don't know that Tennessee has gotten from Cade Phillips and Felix Okpara what I expected them to give them going into the season. Would you agree with that? Have you expected more from those two, or where are you at with Felix and Cade and just the front court minutes going forward? Because it almost feels like there's been a shift on the totem pole.
Yeah, I think some of that's because, to me, largely Felix and Cade kind of are what they are. You know, they're not going to be great offensive players, but are going to be good defensively, and you expect them to be, especially Cade, good rebounders. You know, look, they were collectively, I mean, that was Tennessee's front court all of last season, and obviously they've both played bulk of minutes. Collectively, I don't think they've had a worse game than they had on Tuesday night against Syracuse. I don't think Felix has had a single worse game at Tennessee than he had on Tuesday night. And for some of that, you know, again, the sample size is large with those guys. I'm not worried about them generally. The one thing I would point to with Cade is his rebounding numbers have not been very good. He had 1 rebound on Tuesday night, 2 against Kansas, 2 against Houston. Playing 12, 16, 14 minutes in those games. He needs to rebound the ball better. It would be the big thing I would point to. And maybe with Cade, I would say I'm a little bit worried about it because that trend has just been a couple games long. But generally not overly worried with them, even though I think they were a big part of the loss. Jalen Carey and JP Estrella have a higher ceiling, though, and can give you more offensively, which I think that just creates an interesting dynamic. I think it will be a little bit of hot hand, and any given night someone could have a good night, but what Jalen Carey has done the last 3 games has just been so impressive, and I think Saturday will be a huge test for him because on paper, to me, this is a Illinois matchup that's a bad one for him. Illinois's got a lot of length at the rim with the Ivisic brothers, a couple 7-footers. They're an elite rebounding team. I think, I looked at it a minute ago. 9th in defensive rebounding percentage. So all those things that Jalen Carey does really well, offensive rebounding, scoring on putbacks, using his size to get low on the block and finish, you know, there's going to be more length to challenge that. So I think that will be a big test of not just consistency for Jalen Carey, which I know is a question for him at Vanderbilt, and certainly was a question the first couple games for Tennessee. But as he started to show a little bit more of that, can he adjust? Can he push through what is going to be a really tough matchup for him?
Yes, it will be interested to see whether the length gives him issues and Tennessee issues, or if his strength and that bully mentality is able to give issues to an Illinois front court that is kind of lanky as well. That'll be a fun matchup to watch. I thought Rick summed it up perfectly. I mean, he even admitted that their best offensive lineup is with Dwayne Brown. It's with JP Estrella. It's with Jalen Carey. For them, it's all about, can they prove themselves consistently on the defensive side, which they have failed to do thus far. But my concern would be, I think I'm a little bit more worried about Cade than it sounds like you are, just because I don't know that he's the the offensive player that that Tennessee aspired for him to potentially develop into. It's just there was a lot of talk about the jump shot developing over the offseason, and I've seen him knock down shots in practice. It's not that he's just totally incapable, but it's not translating to the game. And not only is he not able to knock down shots from the perimeter, I mean he's to start the season has been struggling to catch the basketball at times. He's made the wrong pass. He's thrown up wild shots at the rim. I mean, on offense, it feels like it's lob or put back or bust. I mean, it seems like he is very, very limited in what he can do offensively. So for Cade, and I'm a big fan of Cade's game. It's okay that he is more of a defensive player than an offensive player. That does not mean he is a bad basketball player. He still needs to have a huge impact on this team, and I think he can. But if, to your point, if he's not rebounding the way that Tennessee needs him to do, or if he's not helping protect the rim the way he is capable of doing, then I mean I don't know what role he will have on this team, because you have other options in the front court and you're not given much offensively. So for him, the key, I think, to staying on the floor in the midst of all this depth that they now have in the front court is he's got to rebound and protect the rim better than he has up until this point, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. The one thing I would say that is like what he brings that no one else in the front court brings, I think, is a little bit better ability to defend on the perimeter. And it doesn't feel like Tennessee's played a ton of those teams, but as Tennessee starts to play more teams that are, a little bit more guard heavy, they'll see one in 2 weeks or in 2 games when they face Louisville, which I was joking with somebody yesterday. It feels like it's literally just an Alabama scout for Tennessee with the way Louisville wants to play. And they play some teams with more athletic fours. I think Cade gives them something on defense that nobody else in the front court does. But, that's not going to be every game. That's without looking and diving into the whole schedule. I guess that's going to be like 25-30% of games where you don't feel great about, Jalen Carey or JP Estrella being able to defend some guys more out on the perimeter. So rebounding is what I'd point to, in rim protection, like you said, of what he needs to be able to bring night in and night out to make a big impact on this team.
Yeah, I really like Cade Phillips. He's honestly one of my more favorite players to watch on the team, because I grew up on the Memphis Grizzlies in the grit and grind era, and I think Cade would fit in perfectly with that. But I just don't think he's been playing to his game of late. And if he's going to stay on the floor, he's got to rebound more, and he's the rebounding is the big one. But I think he can do a better job of, not a better job, but maybe more consistently protecting the rim alongside Felix Akpara.
Yeah, I agree. And one stat, just to, I don't know, maybe beat a dead horse at this point, but drive it home from the other night. Cade and Felix played a combined 34 minutes, and they were a combined minus 21 on the court. Dwayne Brown and Jalen Carey played a combined 45 minutes and were plus 17. So a pretty stark difference. And it's the same, JP Estrella missed that game. It shouldn't have mattered. Tennessee's depth in the front court's good. It shouldn't have mattered that JP Estrella couldn't play it against Syracuse. Like, you wish you had him, obviously, because it's a guy he's super talented and battled injuries, but you have enough depth that you should have been able to win that game easily without him. But your starting front court played so poorly that it was just very, very bad when they were on the court instead of Carey and Brown, and that ends up costing you.
Do they have a great all-around big that just does everything well? I mean, would the closest be Jalen?
No, because I think they all have limitations. I don't think Jalen's a great rim protector.
I don't either.
I don't think JP's a great rim protector.
Yeah.
Jalen's probably the closest because he's a good offensive player, and I think he's solid on defense, and he rebounds really well. So he probably is the closest.
Yeah, that was my thought of mentioning him as maybe the closest, but I don't think that they have just one all-around big that they can, without a doubt, rely on both sides of the floor. Which, go ahead.
To that point, I'm looking at the KenPom page right now. Jalen Carey, 0 blocks on the season, 0 block percentage, and JP Estrella, 1.2 block percentage, which is lower than Jacoby Gillespie's 1.7 block percentage. So neither of those guys, great rim protectors.
No, not at all. But it brings me to the point that I mentioned earlier of I think it's going to really be matchup dependent on who you can
Yeah.
rely on in the front court, and that there were overreactions at the beginning of the season, at least on my end, of not liking what I'm seeing from Jalen Carey and liking Dwayne Brown and JP Estrella. Felix and Cade have been playing fine as well, and now it's kind of shifted. And I just think that we're going to have a lot of overreactions to the front court throughout the course of the season, and the pendulum will probably swing a lot of different ways, a lot of different times, because they don't have that one well-rounded big. But the good news for Tennessee is that as a group, they are well-rounded. As a group, they can check off all of the boxes, and I think that you're going to see different guys step up in different games throughout the course of the season, depending on the matchup on that given night. What is your big overall thought going into the Illinois game on Saturday night? Is it the battle in the paint, or is it something else that you're going to be keeping an eye on?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is the battle in the paint, just because on the Tennessee offensive perspective, when they've been probably their best strength is what they can do on the glass, and Illinois is so good at taking that away from them. And you saw Kansas was another team that's a really good defensive rebounding team. And in the first half, Tennessee's first shot offense was really good, and it didn't matter a ton. But then when shots stopped falling for Tennessee in the second half, and a lot of them, good shots, open shots from the perimeter, they just weren't able to get themselves as many second chances as they were in the past. So I think that is a big area. And then just in general, the first shot offense, can Tennessee be more efficient than they've been the last couple of games? And I think turnovers will be a conversation for every game for Tennessee. But an Illinois team that doesn't force a ton. So it's kind of one of those where you look at it and you say Tennessee should be fine not turning the ball over in this game. But when they've been as inconsistent with that as they have, and so many of them have just been unforced, it's not necessarily just as simple as that. It feels like against any opponent, Tennessee could roll out of bed and turn the ball over 12 or 13 times.
That's exactly where I was going in terms of what I want to learn about this Tennessee basketball team on Saturday, is that they're not as bad of or they don't commit as many turnovers, or aren't going to commit as many turnovers this season as it appears they might, based off of the first 9 or 10 games, whatever we're at here to start the season. Because you look at Illinois' turnover numbers defensively, and they're not good. They're just not turning teams over just yet. That has obviously been a big bugaboo for Tennessee to start the season, and something that should not be an issue just based off the stats on Saturday night. And as we know, it's something that has to get cleaned up, and I think it will get cleaned up long term. I think it kind of goes hand in hand with the adjustments and learning that Nate Ament and Jacoby Gillespie are going through. You have 17 the other night. 7 of them belonged to Nate. Jacoby, as you mentioned earlier, did not turn it over too much at Syracuse, but he had been a key ingredient to the high turnover numbers in the other games in which turnovers have been an issue. So those two guys settling in and starting to find a rhythm, and I think naturally those turnovers will start to come down. And it really should start on Saturday night, because, again, Illinois does not turn teams over, at least thus far this season.
And that was one of the biggest positives I thought coming out of Vegas, is Tennessee's first 2 real tough games, Houston and Kansas, were their lowest turnover rates of the season. And Jacoby, even in the last 3 games, has 3 turnovers, and that was a huge issue for him early in the season. See if I can find it right now. Yeah, I mean, of the first 5 games, he had 3 or more turnovers in 4 of them. So it does feel like he's cleaning it up a little bit. I think, and this is maybe a little bit of a cop-out answer, but I just want to see the attention to detail be a lot better on the defensive end, on taking care of the basketball. Like, that's Tennessee last year lost back-to-back games just once. I believe it was when they lost to Florida and Kentucky back-to-back. Now, somebody in Kentucky back-to-back, and then their next game was that home game against Florida, where Tennessee was, I called that a classic college basketball result. And
Auburn.
Auburn, yes. And hindsight, because Florida was unbelievable. It was the least amount of points Florida scored by like over 20 all year. Tennessee was without Zakai Ziegler, without Igor, maybe even one other rotational player in that game, and they just whipped up on Florida. And that just felt like a culture win and a team that made a statement after losing 2 straight games. Now Tennessee loses its first game, and then it becomes back to back. I want to see that a team that's locked in and comes out and plays with energy and attention and intention and just attention to the details.
On the way out the door, any big takeaways from the ACC SEC challenge? Or are you ready to crown the ACC as the best conference in college basketball?
No, I think I got 3 general takes. The SEC, I think the top end's not nearly as good as it was last year, but the depth in the league's still good. So 2 team-specific takes, and everybody hates to hear the first one. I think Vanderbilt's for real. Like, I think they're really good, and we won't figure out for sure because they played a lot of solid teams. Like, they killed SMU on Wednesday night. They've played a lot of teams kind of at that caliber, but their second SEC game home against Alabama, we'll learn what level then. But I'm ready to pencil them in as for sure a top 4 team in the SEC. And then maybe a little bit of a hot take. I'm saying Mississippi State, the worst team in the SEC, even worse than South Carolina.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's saying something.
Yeah. And I got Josh Hubbard back too, who's been their best player the last 2 years, but they're just not very good around him.
No, and that's what happens when you lose a guy like Keyshawn Murphy to Auburn over the offseason. But still, I like Chris Jans as a coach. I'm surprised it's been this big of a drop-off. But if you're worse than South Carolina, then you are not doing something right. Maybe they really did take all of basketball's NIL money and gave it to the baseball and football program. They did get I don't know if he's a 5-star, but I think it's Brian Womack, the safety that flipped from Auburn to Mississippi State. Maybe State was able to pull that one off because they took away all of Chris Jans's funds for the basketball team.
Yeah, maybe so. They're 88th in defense right now, and that's obviously his first three teams in Mississippi State, 46, 22, 9th in defense. Last time he had a defense that was worse than this was in 2021 at New Mexico State.
Yikes.
He's been a head coach for 10 years. Most of that Bowling Green and New Mexico State. He's only had 3 defenses that are currently worse than this year's defenses.
That is not good whatsoever. But it's been an interesting week. I thought the SEC would have a bit more success than it had a couple of games get away, such as the Tennessee game. Tennessee should beat Syracuse 8 out of 10 times. That Syracuse team is fine. Like, I don't know that it's bad, but it's certainly not a good basketball team either. And they did not play well either. So that's a game that I think Tennessee is really going to regret long term. Really, the last 2 games, the last 2 losses, the way they played in the second half against Kansas, are games that they are going to regret throughout the course of the season when they think back on it. But a great opportunity to bounce back this weekend against Louisville. Then they'll have 10 days off, I assume, because of finals, before their next home game on December 16th against the top 25 Louisville team that did not look good at Arkansas. That was going to be one of my bigger takeaways from the ACC SEC Challenge is stock down on Louisville, although they had looked good up until that game. I'm buying stock in Arkansas. Like, I don't know to what extent I'm buying stock, but I think Arkansas is going to be pesky, and that's going to be a fun SEC opener for the Vols on January 2nd.
Yeah, I think Arkansas had, they'd lost their 2 big games before that, but they were right in that Duke game until the under 4 timeout. The close loss of Michigan State, I think like the first week of the season, like that looks better in hindsight. Michigan State's been good early this season. So, yeah, I like Arkansas. To me, they're figuring out the pieces a lot with some talented freshmen that I think are maybe a little bit better than DJ Wagner, than Carter Knox, and then the returning guys. I think as they kind of figure that out, and who knows, Calipari's not always the best at managing that stuff, but they have a really high ceiling.
Ryan, where can people follow you and your work?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at rschump00, RSCHUMP00, and then all stuff over at RockyTopInsider.com, at RockyTopInsider on all socials. So tons of football stuff this week, and basketball, have basketball at Illinois, and Ryan Sylvia doing a great job covering the Lady Vols. So he had, if you want to go, it was an ugly game on Wednesday. It was honestly Tennessee Syracuse on the hardwood out in Palo Alto, but Tennessee found a way to win against Stanford. So he had a lot of coverage from that. So plenty of stuff on all things Vol sports.
Yes, the Lady Vols, it was exactly the same as Tennessee Syracuse. The only difference was The Lady Vols did not miss a floater in the middle of the paint like Jalen Carey did, and did not miss the open look that Nate Ament had on a miraculous heave from Bishop Boswell. I
QB1.
still can't believe how great of a look Nate got on that play.
Yeah. I've been in disbelief. I was like, the clock guy had to mess up. There's no way he actually should have gotten that shot off. But
it felt like it was like 2 seconds long.
Yeah, it did. But Bishop Boswell, QB1. We've joked Bishop can help the football team at safety. He might be quarterback. He might be two-way star for him next year.
I know. High school receiver. Going to play safety for the Vols. And then also going to have to play on offense, be the emergency quarterback. He's going to be like the third quarterback on these NFL rosters that are like inactive but technically active in case of an emergency. That's going to be Bishop Boswell behind George McIntyre and Faison Brandon next year. But Ryan, we greatly appreciate your time and always appreciate you stopping by, my friend.
Yeah, enjoyed it as always.
For Ryan Schumpert of Rocky Top Insider, I'm Ben McKee. This has been another edition of the GoVols247 Podcast.